O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. How often have I desired to gather my children like a hen gathers her brood under her wings. I have to start by saying that I have learned a lot about chickens this week. I had no idea that they are as complex as they apparently are. For example, I learned that they have a sense of the near and the far future. For example, when given a chance between pressing a button right away that gives them a few pellets and waiting for a bit longer to press a button that will give them more pellets, 90% of the time they will wait and press the button that gives them more pellets. Chickens are able to make logical conclusions of the sort that children are only able to master from about the age of 7. So think about that. Your 7-year-old is about as smart as a chicken. I never thought of it like that. I know there's some kids here. That's not really what I mean, but anyway. Hens will nurture their chicks that are not their own. I read a story about a family who kept chickens as pets and kind of rescued chickens. And they rescued a couple of chicks that had been left for dead at a slaughterhouse and brought them home. And very quickly, one of their own hens began cuddling and protecting these strange chicks that had been brought into her presence. Mother hens are so protective of their children that you often cannot see the chicks when you first arrive in a barn. The moms puff up so big that they hide their babies under them so that not one single chick can be taken from them. Indeed, hens not only protect their own species, but they will protect kittens and dogs and piglets and ducklings. And you can find on the internet, not photoshopped, chickens with dogs and piglets and kittens and ducklings under them. It's amazing to see. Hens are fierce in the face of danger if there are others to protect. They will fly straight at a predator, no matter what it is, cat, dog, bear, wings flapping, beaks pecking, in order to distract the intruder away from their vulnerable cares. They willingly die to protect their young. Now, learning all this made me wonder about the human tradition of using the word chicken as another word for coward. Jesus was no coward. Now, of course, it's just a metaphor, but it's a provocative one. Jesus had access to other metaphors in the Bible, in his Bible. Remember, the Hebrew Scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures were Jesus' Bible. That's the Bible that he knew. And so he would have known that God is compared to an enraged she-bear in Hosea, that God is compared to a soaring eagle in Isaiah, God as a laboring woman also in Isaiah, God is the mother of a healthy, happy toddler in the Psalms, God is a skilled midwife, also in the Psalms. During Women's History Month, it's especially appropriate to lift up these metaphors that note the feminine aspect of God's character. But out of all these images, Jesus didn't choose those. He chose a hen. More on hens in a moment. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem as we get this story this morning. He's teaching, he's preaching, he's healing. All along the way, he is devoted to this city, to Jerusalem, to its people, and all that it represents in the history of his people. In the Gospel of Luke, Jerusalem practically becomes a character in and of itself, a personified character that interacts in the story. And though Jesus knows Jerusalem will be the site of his death, nothing, not even the murderous hostility of the Roman puppet king Herod, will prevent him from taking his message into the heart of those people in that city that he loves so much. Though an easier road certainly was there and must have been extremely tempting, nothing, not even the hostility of his own people, will prevent him from making himself vulnerable to their hatred. He wants to gather them in, not to punish them, not to retaliate. But we know that mother hens can't make their chicks come to safety any more than humans can force friends or lovers or spouses or children to return home. They can only open their wings and wait and pray. They come when they come. And in fact, in 2 weeks, we'll have a beautiful story about a father waiting for a child to come home. Now, the temptation to try to protect loved ones from the painful effects of their choices must have been just as heartbreaking for Jesus as it is for any one of us to watch someone we love walk straight towards a path of destruction. Jesus' action and metaphor tell us something necessary that we need to know about God. We so often think in terms of humans' desire for God or of human emotions about God. And yet here is a powerful image of God's yearning for us. God's yearning for us, for you, for me. How often have I desired to gather my children like a hen gathers her brood under her wings? One of our temptations may be to see God as a distant, heavenly judge or as some kind of unmoved mover. But Jesus shows us that nothing could be further from the truth. God desires to be close, to be our protector, to have us in the shadow of the divine wings, to be safe. In the reading from Genesis today, we also see God's desire to be in relationship with us, God's willingness to risk God's own very life to be in relationship. God comes to Abram in a vision this morning to promise him and Sarai not only a child, but descendants who are as numerous as the stars in the sky, uncountable, and also to promise him land with very specific boundaries. You may have noticed that. The part of the story left out by the lectionary writers indicates that the fulfillment of this promise will not be without delay and with heartache and so forth, but nonetheless there's this promise that God gives. And when Abram asks for reassurance, it's a very strange, to us, ritual that unfolds. And it's in the context of the first of two versions of the covenant that God makes with Abram. Now, I know I'm in the presence of some Wednesday morning Bible study scholars, so I hope I get this right. Now, technically, this is a promise text, not a covenant text, because a promise is one-sided, right? But a covenant is relational. It's two-sided. The second iteration of God's covenant, which you read, I know, in chapter 17, is more two-sided. Abraham, with a new name, has responsibilities that he has to do to take care of his side of the covenant. Anyway, this is a promise text. And so this morning, as part of this promise ritual, God asks Abraham, this is the one thing Abraham has to do, he cuts a series of very specific animals in half and leaves a path between them. And then God, symbolized by this smoking fire pot and flaming torch, moves between the halves of the animals. And this seals God's promise to Abram. Now, what we know, what scholars tell us, what this means is that the person, the being, whoever walks through between those dismembered animals, is saying, if I break this promise, this is going to happen to me. If I break this promise, I will die. That's astounding. As if it were possible, God is in effect saying, I am willing to die to keep this promise to you out of love and dedication to you. God commits to this promise at such a depth that God considers death. It's mind-blowing to consider God's willingness to become vulnerable even unto death for us, for Abram. But that, of course, is the central claim, isn't it? One of the central claims that Christians have made about who Jesus is. God in Jesus Christ is willing to die, and in fact does die, because he will not compromise in living the life that gives us life. Jesus faces death in order to give us life, to show us the life that is everlasting life. In a world where might seeks to make right and seems to make right, where brute force is glorified, where raw power seems to have its way, Jesus seeks to show us a better way, the way of a hen who seeks to gather in rather than retaliate, who seeks to protect rather than dominate, who yearns to connect with the children of his heart.